That one felt really like Halloween to me for some reason. Like,
Demystifying.
Oh, okay, got it. All right, makes sense now.
See.
okay. Thank you for the explanation, because I was waiting for something to pop out at us.
Yeah, I know it's kind of short too. Like usually they're longer or something.
All right. Well, after that, we're gonna go ahead. Like to welcome everyone to this week's Chill with Jim. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this episode, where it is always business up top and pajamas on the bottom.
Rocking the pajamas still.
I
Still
don't know
doing
why
it.
that gets me every time.
Good. Well, and that's good because you're on here quite a bit. So the best jokes last a long time, I guess. So I'm your host, Jim McCarthy, and I am the client advocate for Strix, Louisiana. My job is to make sure that our clients have the best, our clients are set up with the best software, equipment, and the best IT solutions to help make sure that their businesses are running at optimal efficiency. We also have David DeArmond with us.
Hey, thank you, Jim. I am David DeOrman, owner of Strix LA, and thank you guys for being here. Looking forward to this one. We're going to learn some things today. I like that.
I do too. All right. So before we start, we do like to share a little bit about Strix, Louisiana. At Strix, we believe that there is always a better, simpler, more secure way to do just about everything in this world. So what that means to us is we are constantly searching and adapting our processes to make sure that we do indeed have the best solutions in place. Now, we believe that part of this responsibility is to help educate our clients as well as others. We like to bring awareness to current security risks and just talk about the general trends going on right now in the IT world. We also like to bring on special guests, which is what we are doing today. We have Brad Proctor with QRI, who is going to be demystifying wireless networks. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and let Brad tell us a little bit about himself.
Yeah, so I'll start out I like to get origin stories, so I'll give you my origin story. I've been using and abusing tech, and I clarify saying the word abusing because that means that you can take it apart. But I was doing that since 12. In high school, I wanted to be a meteorologist, and so they placed me in these computer classes, as meteorologists need computers, and these classes were preparing me to take the A plus, and I fell in love with computers at that point. I graduated high school with 2 industry certifications. I was a Microsoft certified professional as well as A plus. Kind of from there, I've always just been the kind of person that wants to learn whatever I can about whatever I'm interested in. And so I started doing a blog just because I was like, hey, it's cool to write stuff online. What could go wrong? And so I just started a blog about tech news, and this was 2003. WordPress was actually in beta. And so hardly used. It was, when no one knew what it was. Used that early on, and I kind of geared it around tech news, but a lot of it was early hacking type things, techniques. And I also did, which is very relevant to today, is I did videos and certain things on what's called war driving. And so if you're not familiar with war driving is, that's where you ride around and scan for open wireless networks. So fits right into what we're doing today. Started a podcast early on, and 2005, where you literally had to write the RSS feeds. So there was no fancy service to do it for you. And of course, all this was before I was even started my career. Then I went work for a newspaper, started there for a little bit. After that, when Twitter came on the scene, I decided, hey, I think we can kind of gather around the social media thing. And I launched a group in the city where I lived doing tweet ups. So tweet ups are just meetups from people you meet on Twitter. Back then, they called me crazy. Why would I be meeting people online or offline that I met online? It landed me a job. I ended up being able to help host one of the first tweet ups at Toy Fair. I worked for a toy store or e-commerce. So that was, my small little claim to fame of of the toy industry. And kind of what got me back into tech, because I was doing social media at that point, was I helped a local repair shop get their Apple certification off the ground. And once that was done, helped them start a networking division and an MSP. And that's where a lot of this wireless knowledge comes from. Did a lot of engineering and pre-sales work and some installing for large scale wireless networks. So, and then I came to QRI, moved from North Carolina to Louisiana for family, and kind of combining all my different knowledge together to be able to do what I do now. So, and I do have 5 kids. So if you see them run behind me, just say, hey.
Awesome. So I'm not the only Yankee on the cast today, I guess.
Well, North Carolina would clearly say they are not Yankees. I'll throw that out
there. you are bringing it, to a different level in Michigan. A lot of people down here think anything north of I-10 is kind of a Yankee. So, but Jim, that's taking Yankee to a whole other level.
Well, I thought I-10 was the border, I guess. I'm hanging out with too many diehards or something. So, well, Brad, thank you for the introduction. Very interesting. As you guys can see, he has quite a bit of knowledge on today's subject, a lot of experience as well. So a little bit of the breakdown today, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to go into wireless is physics, not magic. Our next one will be mesh versus extenders, and then we'll talk a little bit about 802.11. What? So to go ahead and kick it off, a little prelim questions here. We don't want to take away from any of the details you're going to be providing in just a few minutes here, but in general, Brad, why do you think wireless networking is so beneficial and important?
It's beneficial for many reasons, but the biggest reason is mobile devices. It allows mobile devices to truly be mobile. And it also, we don't think about it here in the US a lot, but in third world countries, a lot of times if they were to go and lay fiber, these people don't understand that it's fiber. And so they will actually go and dig it up thinking it's copper. And then, well, the nice thing is if you do, wireless, or what they consider a WISP, which is a wireless internet service provider, they can put these high up on towers and be out of the way of people trying to unbury fiber that once they do that, then, it's kind of useless. And then in the US, in rural areas, there's a huge gap where there's not enough internet coverage in those areas. And the wireless internet service providers fill that gap some. So wireless it kind of allows internet to reach the masses without laying a bunch of cable.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're talking about the broadband application of it, because I know probably a lot of people think wireless and they're just thinking their home. But the broadband, yeah, you can push that all over the place.
Yeah, and especially Elon Musk and SpaceX with Starlink, which is completely different than what we're talking about today. But the whole concept of wireless is wireless to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. And so on the flip side, what are some of the problems and maybe some of the security risks that are associated with wireless Wi-Fi, however you want to say it?
So Wi-Fi, and we're kind of going to break it down now to what people see in their home or their business. And that's when we call it Wi-Fi. And it's it's unlicensed, meaning you don't have to get a license from the FCC to broadcast the signal. And so anyone can scan it, and they can potentially crack the password, which gives them, basically unfederated access to that network. And so really it's comes down to if they want to hack into your wireless network, it's proximity and time. That's really all it takes. And so you got to put things in place and, make yours a little bit harder than the next.
Okay. Great point. Great point. If you want to see some more about how to secure that, last week's episode was really good about network segmentation. I believe it was last week. So you can always check that out. But let's go ahead and get into the physics. And we all think of it as kind of magic. A lot of us just see the Wi-Fi going on and it's just this magical thing that exists. But I know there's a whole bunch more behind that technology than just plugging in a router and letting it do its thing. So can you give us a little breakdown in some simple terms for us that, explains how wireless Wi-Fi is working?
Yeah, so we'll look at a couple of photos in a second, or diagrams, but Wi-Fi, kind of to put it simply, there's a little fun tidbit for you. Wi-Fi, a lot of people think it means wireless fidelity. It does not mean that. It actually doesn't mean anything. It was just a catchy term that the Wi-Fi Alliance came up with, because fidelity is an analog term, and we're not talking about analog, we're talking about digital. Digital, you either get it or you don't. It's not going to change based on the quality of the signal. So, which is what fidelity is. So there's a little tidbit there that you may have not known. But so when we talk about Wi-Fi, it's really just it's the technology that allows us to transmit digital data. And I think the digital part is very important to understand. And we're doing that using radio waves. So you can think of AM and FM radio. It's using the same type of wave as that. And I think this is probably the best way for me to, let me just go ahead and show you all this. Give me a second.
All right.
All right. We'll play it from the start. All right, you can all see that?
Yes, sir. We got it up.
Okay. All right. And so what we're looking at, this is basically the electromagnetic spectrum. So the first thing I want to point out by this is obviously this gets into physics, but I think it's important to understand. So if you look, it's kind of split between red on the right and then this blue on the left. What you're looking at is what they separated by of ionizing energy and non-ionizing energy. It's important because a lot of people ask, well, can Wi-Fi, can it, is it radioactive? Is it going to harm me? Well, yeah, I mean, if you put it right beside your head, but that's rarely going to happen. Ionizing energy means that there's enough energy there to be able to change DNA, break down things, change the way that is functions. So you normally think of X-rays, we wear lead vest, or gamma rays is which when you get into nuclear energy. Right here, the split kind of, at 1 petahertz, which is the frequency, you end up with visible light. So that's the light you can see. As you get a little bit lower on the spectrum, you get to where you have radio. That's your traditional radio. And then you go a little bit higher and you start to see that Wi-Fi kind of falls in, and it's on here. It's kind of weird because it actually falls in 2 different bands. So we have a 2.4 gigahertz, which is going to be lower. And then we have a 5 gigahertz, which is going to be higher. And so the reason I'll point that out is if you notice, a microwave falls right within this same spectrum. And so the reason that's important is because that's how you get interference for certain things. And so one thing we'll talk about really quick is that when you look at this, if you look at where it says radio frequency spectrum across the top, this is what the actual frequency looks like. So this is how the wave goes as it's going. Is if you notice, as you get further to the right, or that frequency number increases, it gets it's a lot up and down really fast. Well, think about that going through walls. So the higher that number gets, the less likely it is that it's going to be able to penetrate a wall. Think about visible light. Visible light is hard for it to go through a wall. And so the lower the frequency, the easier it can get through a wall. It's important because when you have a router that has 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, that 2.4 can penetrate walls, objects easier because it's a lower frequency. 5 gigahertz is not going to do that. So I wanted to show that, and that'll all make sense in a little bit as we get a little bit further. But then we're going to kind of, and this is the physics part, guys. So this is the fun part. When you're looking at a wave, so a radio wave, you have a couple of things to look at. You have the wavelength. That is how far it is from crest to crest. You also have where it can be from trough to trough. So that's at the bottom. The wavelength is that top to that top or that bottom to that bottom. The frequency is how often you see that change. So the frequency should always be the same with wireless. The amplitude is the height from the midpoint up. So the reason this is important when we get into transmitting data on wireless, and I'm just scratching the surface, this gets really in depth. We deal with what we call QAM modulator scheme. And so we're taking these zeros and ones, which is all that computer data is. In fact, this is another little fun thing, is that computers cannot subtract. They can only add the inverse.
Okay, I didn't
And
know.
so there you go. And so when we're dealing with all zeros and ones, you can only add. And so we're taking all these zeros and ones that goes into what's called a QAM modulator. And it's taking the amplitude and the phase and it's modulating it, changing it a little bit to create this crazy looking signal. And that is what is taking on either the sending and receiving end to take all these bits of data and convert it from an analog signal back to a digital. That all happens pretty fast. So that's just kind of breaking that down. I know that's a lot, so I don't expect you to pass the test at the end, but but that's kind of how I think it's really important to know or understand how much is going on behind the scenes and why talking about frequency is important.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah. And great breakdown there. I think definitely helps us to see it, a visual, like you said, definitely helps a lot. David, you had something?
Yeah, so I don't know if we're going to get into it at some point, but we're looking at the frequencies there. You're talking about 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, but a lot of people see the channels as well. Can you maybe explain the channels of a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi router and a 5 gigahertz and how everybody's signals don't just get mashed up together?
Yeah, so when you talk about the 2.4 gigahertz, there's a certain width within that is allowed. It's kind of subdivided into little chunks of frequency. And so when that happens, you have those kind of segmented out. 2.4 doesn't have as much width, which is where we get the term bandwidth from. And so when you do that, you have a small space that you can fit these channels in. So we say this frequency and then plus 0.5 is this frequency. And that's how you get those channels. And so in 2.4, you only have 3 channels that do not overlap, which is that's channel 1, that's channel 6, and that's channel 11. Anything in between there, like if you have channel 1 and then channel 3, well, 1 and 3 are basically the same because they overlap. And so that's kind of how those channels are determined. When you get into 5 gigahertz, you still have channels. And that's just that subdivided frequency is the best way to put it. And inside of that, you have way more space, so way more bandwidth in the 5 gigahertz. So you can create what are called larger channel widths. And that means that you can kind of mesh those two together, which means you can fit more data through that bigger channel. And so when you get into speed, 2.4 gigahertz is going to be slower because it just cannot send as much data through it. 5 gigahertz is going to be faster because you can send more data through those channels.
But it doesn't go through walls as well. So
Correct.
maybe you don't get
Yeah. Yeah. 5
the
doesn't go
coverage
through
that you
walls as
want.
well.
And
But
so,
also that's a benefit too, because if 2.4 goes through walls, that means your neighbors are coming through your walls. And so 5 gigahertz, because it can't go through walls as well, you have less interference. One, you have more channels, and two, you have less interference because there's just not there.
okay. All right. And so does the actual signal of the 5 not go as far, or is it just that it gets blocked by objects along the way?
Both.
Okay.
Because I mean, just if you were to put it in open fields, 2.4 is still going to go further than 5. Just the nature of the moisture in the air is going to slow it down. So
Okay. Okay.
Same
Awesome.
same reason that AM will go further than FM, right?
correct. And when we were talking about modulation, AM stands for amplitude modulation. So they send that analog signal by changing the amplitude. And then on FM, it's frequency modulation. So they're changing the frequency ever so slightly to get that signal. So when you have analog signal, that change in the frequency or amplitude, that is the data. In the digital world, you're having to like kind of modulate it and then encode it and decode it to get the data back and forth. So there's a lot more involved with the digital side of things.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome to know. So I know one of the toughest aspects of wireless internet is the signal strength and the speed. We've talked a lot about the why of why it doesn't go as far with the 5 because it gets blocked by a lot of objects. But if I'm prepping my house or a business for Wi-Fi and want to make sure that I'm covered, what's a good, game plan, or what are some of the things I can try to plan for to make sure that I get the right equipment, the right number of wireless access points and all of that?
Yeah, so I think when you really look at it, and you don't run into this as much nowadays, but let's talk about what's in the walls. So if you look at older homes that are made of plaster, they have plaster walls. A lot of people think, oh, it's the plaster that causes the issue because it's thick. It's thicker than sheetrock is. Well, what they forget about is behind plaster walls, or most of them, there's this mesh. There's this metal mesh with the plasters applied to. So it's not the plaster, it's actually that metal mesh that's acting as a Faraday cage, which is to block wireless signal, no matter what it is. And so, older homes that have plaster walls, they have a very hard time with wireless signals because the walls literally block the signal.
Okay.
And then when you get into different scenarios of a business, let's say it's a small business with 4 offices or nothing too large. A lot of times it's the placement of if they have let's just say one wireless router, everything's there together. A lot of times what happens is you'll have your DMARC location where the stuff's coming in from the provider. It's probably in the back of the office, in a closet. They keep the door shut. It's not in a convenient location for wireless to really get out of where it is. It's probably a lot of office designs. You'll have that back area where that is, and then out in front of that you'll have like a little kitchenette where you have your break room, and then you'll have the office space. Well, you're adding in one way in the back of the building, and then you also have that kitchenette that has possibly water going in the walls. Water also absorbs wireless signal. Yeah, if you have tile, again, that's gonna a lot. Sometimes they have metal backing too. There's a lot of things that come into play. And so it's really centralizing the wireless where you need it. And if not, if you can't get it to where you need it and it's still weak, is adding either another access point to be closer to where you are, to where the data needs to be transmitted, or some kind of mesh network or some kind to be able to get it there.
That's something that your Cox and your Spectrums and all of those that are selling you internet service, and they're wrapping up the the Wi-Fi router with the cable modem. It's an all-in-one device, which is very convenient. But they're probably not going to take that into consideration, right? They're not going to look at your layout and say, well, you know what, this really isn't the best solution for you. What you need is this, this, and this. And so that's where it's important to understand what you're talking about here, that if that closet where the signal is coming in is way in the back, then you may need to make some other considerations.
Yeah, we got a visitor. We like visitors on Cable Jim. We love them.
And so
yeah, go ahead.
he's like,
he's probably going to start. He's going to start explaining it here in a second.
Yeah, possibly. And that's Charlie, by the way, so everybody knows.
Hey, Charlie.
Hola, Charlie. All right. Well, so a lot of things come into play there. You mentioned water. So are there other things that are made mostly of water that might slow down Wi-Fi? I know one thing you mentioned with the kitchenette, you're also going to probably throw in a microwave. And the microwave, I can guarantee you, will mess up the signal. And just in my house alone, kick on the microwave and the Wi-Fi to the TV would go out.
Yeah.
And like it took us a while to put the two together. But my roommate was like, every time you run the microwave, my TV goes out. And so we got a new router and it took care of that. But what are some of those other things that we could see in play here for maybe like a big area?
Yeah. So if you get into large arenas or you get into churches, that's a place where you start to see a lot of churches are investing in putting Wi-Fi in their buildings just because of different Bible apps and things. But we forget about it. And a common trend early on when arenas were being put together is to put the Wi-Fi access points underneath the seats. The issue is that people are mostly made of water. And so
did y'all see that Star Trek episode? Sorry, I'm going to derail it here. It's one of the first Star Trek: The Next Generation episodes, and the aliens they're facing the Enterprise and they're calling the humans ugly bags of mostly water.
Yeah, I mean that's
sorry.
It's true, but we are. And so it still is common for them to put it underneath the seats, and that's just to get it out of the way. But a lot of times what you have to do is turn up the signal a lot, enough to penetrate it. With some of the newer technologies, they're starting to mount them a little bit higher and point them down because they can do what's called beam forming. So they can actually like kind of really focus in on an area and then just do a bunch of them to get that signal to each individual person that's there. But arenas have always been difficult because you put that many people. COVID, it might be easier, but you put that many people in one space, and it's not overhead, you're getting a lot of that signal just goes away. It's absorbed by the human.
Wow. Yeah, and I can imagine they probably when they're running their Wi-Fi tests, there's no one in the building or very few people in the building. Yeah. So it's like, wait, what happened to our signal?
Yeah. And they make it work. It's not, I mean, cause you've probably been somewhere didn't even know it was under your seat. It does work, but it's quickly kind of changing a little bit to where they're starting to realize, okay, the technology's changed a little bit. We can kind of do this a little bit differently. But yeah, so humans block wireless signal.
Wow. Well, speaking of humans, so when we're looking at setting up a Wi-Fi at our house, maybe at our business, do you have some security advice that you can give us kind of just for the everyday user?
Yeah, so the everyday user, the biggest thing is, a lot of people get, from their internet service provider, whether that's Cox, AT&T, they're going to give you a lot of times a wireless router, and they're going to have a pre-printed wireless password on there. Most of the time, nowadays, they've gotten to where that password is fairly secure from the standpoint of the length of the complexity of the password. For most use cases, that is okay. But sometimes, if you want to take that extra step, if you're able to change that password, change it to something that's at least 15 characters. And I would say don't use like a password, like an actual word, but like a phrase, like a sentence of some kind that you can remember. And then, from there, because 15 characters is a little bit hard to crack. That's the whole idea. It takes a lot longer to do that. Now, once you get to 25, if it's a fairly complex 25 character password, it's going to be a much longer to crack, and someone's not going to sit there for that long to be able to do that. So just a good password. And the reason that's important is that the wireless password for most use cases is also what encrypts the traffic. So not only does it let you onto the network, that's also what's encrypting that communication between you and the access point or the router. It's important because they get that key. Not only can they get on, they can decrypt all that data that's going back and forth between. And the other kind of feature that's popular, it's kind of somewhat disabled or being disabled and kind of pushed out of the market, is WPS, which is wireless protected setup. And it was this easy way they came up with that you push a button on your router and then you go over and you type a code or push a button on the other device. And it creates like a temporary code that the two can, communicate together. There's some inherent flaws in the way that works. And there's been some security issues around it where it can easily kind of be cracked. Again, someone has to be nearby. They have to catch you pushing the button. There's a lot of, scenarios there that are a little more difficult to really in real world scenario. But if you can, don't use it. And if your router supports it, they're usually, you can disable that feature. So, and then if you're really concerned about, hey, the data I'm transferring over the wireless network is, even if it's your home network or if it's your business network, or if you're really worried about it, use a VPN in between that, because what's happening there is even if they get on your wireless network, if you're using a VPN, all that traffic is encrypted. And so they may get on the network, but they can't get to that underlying traffic that you're transmitting on the network.
Yeah, that's I think an important step if you have the sensitive data, or if it's a business environment, because we had the episode, I don't know, months back about the vulnerabilities in wireless routers and cable modems and everything else, because they're running on old operating systems. Some of them were 17 years old. And so they have these operating systems that have known vulnerabilities in them. And if people know what they're doing and are targeting you, then maybe they can find that little in, or if they're just scanning a wide number of modems out there, maybe they get into your network. But if you're running that VPN, you've created this secure tunnel that, again, just another layer of protection. That's what we preach over and over: layers of protection.
Yeah. And so on top of that, not only to have a good password for your wireless signal, but there's a way to log into your router with an IP address. And that's another one where you want to change the default information that comes with your router, because most of the time it's going to be something like admin for the username, and the password is going to be password or admin. And I've gone to multiple Cox, let's say internet service providers, where they install the equipment. They do, they give them a secure password for the Wi-Fi network for the wireless signal itself, but then they leave the default admin and password as the username and password. And so there's only, and the other thing is, most of these devices are going to use the similar or the same IP address. So you have quite a few bits and pieces of the puzzle there.
Yeah, that's where you get into, the companies open up their maybe a guest network, and they think, okay, well, now I'm safe because I've opened up this guest network. I've done good network segmentation, right? But if you haven't changed those passwords, that guest network may give someone access to the web admin portal of the router, at which time, it's got the default password. So you go in, you log in as admin, go look at all of the other networks, set up routing and forwarding and everything else so that you have always on access to this person's network. And that's that's what some people used to do in war driving, right? Or still do in war driving. That's one of the things that they would look for as they hit a network, one that they see open. They're gonna look for that admin console. Can they get in to the admin panel?
So yeah, I'll since I mentioned war driving, I did used to do that. I had a antenna that I would keep on top of my car, and my now wife was my driver, and yeah, that's really did happen. And I actually carried around. There's a specific way you go about this. So I did not do this to break into anybody's network. Was not my intention. What I did was just kind of collect information and kind of see what was out there. And the way you do that without doing, because you can scan any open frequencies, that is not against any kind of law at all. But once there's theft of service, which means that you connect to something, you're using something, then you have a potential issue on your hands. So the way you go about it is in Windows, when you're scanning this way, you disable the TCP/IP stack completely. So there's no way that any communication or theft of service is going to potentially happen. You can still scan all day long, but you're not actually connecting to the network. There's no way you could. And so I would do that on purpose. I would actually had a specific setup I would use to do that. And then I carried around a copy of the FCC regulation that said I was allowed to scan open frequencies, just in case I got pulled over.
Did that ever happen?
It was close, but never where I had to explain it. But
your wife sped off, and
I had bumper stickers. I had bumper stickers that said what I was doing. So.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought maybe your wife had taken some good evasive driving courses, and she escaped the police.
Yeah. And then people still do it. I haven't done it in years, but I can't even imagine the amount of networks you would find nowadays. This was 2004, 2005. So, wow. And most of those networks were open. I think 70% were open. Nowadays, kind of security, default is to put a password on it, which is great compared to what it used to be. So.
All right. Well, you had mentioned having that antenna on top of your car there. So, this was a question that we had. Is bigger really always better? And I know there's a lot of guys out there hanging on this, but does the size of your antenna really matter for wireless networking?
So for what I was doing, I was scanning. So I needed a larger antenna to be able to see what's out there. And so what a lot of people do, or they think works, is they will get this big antenna. And you saw this in the mid 2000s. They had something called a cantina, which is literally a Pringles can with an antenna in it that was more directional. And they would do that, and they'd be like, "Hey, I got Wi-Fi signal all the way across, this field, and I can pick up the signal." What they forget about is that devices, so like an iPhone, has a very small antenna. In fact, the antennas, and most of them are built into it. You don't see it sticking up. They're fairly small. And so, yes, you may be able to put a big antenna inside your house, and that signal, you may get full bars to your device. But the issue is that with digital communication, it's kind of two-way. You got to get from point A to point B. Well, then you also got to get back from point B to point A. So that strong signal can get to the device, but the device cannot talk back to it because its antenna is a lot smaller than that big one. And so that a lot of times is you get that even in a house where, you get to a far bedroom and you pick up your device, like, I have signal, but it's just not working. And that's kind of what you're experiencing, is that signal's making it there, but you may not be able to fully get back and make a request. A request requires you to get back to it. And so if you can't, then it's going to seem like it's not connected or not working.
Oh, that explains a lot. Yeah, I'm sure I've had that happen before where what's going on here? I have full bars. It looks like I should be great, but it just was bogging down. So they need to go back and forth, answer the question and ask the question. So, well, we'll go ahead. We're going to move on to the next section that we were going to talk about, the mesh versus extenders. And first of all, what is mesh? What is an extender? And what are some of their differences?
So we'll start with extenders because I think this is where most people kind of understand. And there's kind of subcategories of what we would consider an extender. You have a repeater, which is just repeating the signal, and then you have some that are kind of like basically a client joins and then repeats the signal. Extenders, they basically connect to your existing network. So you have a wireless network, you buy this extender, it connects as a client to your network. And it creates a lot of times an extended. So you'll see like a lot of times Netgear is famous for this. They'll put an underscore ext at the end. And so it's actually two separate wireless networks. One is connecting back to the other one via a wireless connection. So what happens is it kind of just blindlessly repeats all that traffic. And so it's not very efficient at all. Because if you're connected to the extended network and you're using a lot of data, you are bogging down that entire connection between the extender and then back to the main wireless router. And so it's not very efficient. And it's broadcasting all traffic, whether that traffic's supposed to go to that device over here or not. And so it's just not the best way. And one little thing that a lot of people do with extenders that's a very common mistake is they'll buy an extender and say, I have terrible reception in this part. And so they'll put the extender right where that problem is. And you're like, no, you need to put the extender in between where you have the problem and where your wireless comes in. Because your idea is you want to meet in the middle and extend that network over. So extenders in many cases for small houses or even small businesses, they work if installed correctly. But they're not very efficient at all. And so then you get into the idea of mesh. And so what mesh is kind of, it's still an extender per se, but it's a little more intelligent of how it does it. And so you'll have that main router, and then you'll have what are called mesh points or access points off that. And the idea is that they are broadcasting the exact same Wi-Fi name. So to the device, to the user, you just connect to one wireless network. And that mesh network's kind of doing the magic behind the scenes of intelligently telling the traffic where to go and telling your device which mesh point to connect to. And some of the higher end ones will even have another radio, like we were talking about radio frequencies, that creates a backhaul. So it's separate from everything else. You don't even see this network, and it's handling that backhaul communication between the other ones. Those are the ones that are the most efficient and give you the best speed.
Okay.
But the big thing with mesh, why it's so important, is it gets that faster, more reliable 5 gigahertz signal closer to you. So as we mentioned, 5 can't go through walls as easily. And so you got to get it to you somehow. And so mesh networks allow that to happen a lot more efficiently.
Okay. So if you had to choose between the two.
And nowadays, mesh all day long.
Okay. Okay.
That may require that, you have to take out what you have and put a new system in. But you're going to be much happier with that in the long run than you will with an extender.
Gotcha. And then some of the I guess you said some of the benefits, but what are some of the cons between the two?
For mesh, really price. Mesh, okay. Again, you're replacing a whole system in most cases. And with extenders, you can get them for $30, some of them. There's some of them are really inexpensive. And one or two people in a house, that may be all you need. But mesh is going to be more expensive. But the efficiency side of it, mesh is going to, really make a big difference. As far as and ease of setup. A lot of these mesh networks now, you set it up with a mobile app. It's going to help you kind of guide you where to put the mesh point. You put it there. It tells you, hey, that's not a great spot. You move it down the hallway. They've gotten a little bit better about kind of helping you set that up and figure out where to put it in your house or business.
All right. All right. Well, I knew, so this has happened a few times, ease of setup. Well, people out there who have bought extenders and just plug it into the wall and think that it is now extending your network. There is a little more to it than just plugging it in. You actually have to set it up and connect it to your existing network. But I've had a few friends and clients that they just plug it into the wall and they think it's extending their network. But there's a little more to it. It's not quite that easy yet. And actually, there's more we wanted to talk about with the mesh versus extender, but let's kick off into the 802.11 what? Can you explain what these numbers mean?
I think the easiest way is I have a little chart to show you all. I think will help tremendously. So what this is, and this is where it gets really confusing, is you have two different organizations. You have the IEEE. That is the organization that creates these standards of how wireless communications happen. That is where we get these 802.11 numbers. That is the actual IEEE standard. These are engineers creating this. That's why we have these crazy numbers. Then you have what's called the Wi-Fi Alliance. The Wi-Fi Alliance is just a nonprofit that is responsible for promoting the use of Wi-Fi. They decided early on, everyone probably remembers, hey, my network is 802.11n, it's 802.11g, and that's how it was sold on the box. Wireless N is what you would call it. You may see it called Wireless G. And so what those mean are just the standards. And as of recent, the Wi-Fi Alliance decided this is way too confusing, which it is. And so they started creating actual like generation numbers like we see with cell phones, 4G, 5G. And they went with Wi-Fi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this every generation we have up from that will be another number. The first wireless standard was you'll see a lot of these come out before they're ratified or they're actually set in stone. So really you start to see this a little bit earlier than 99, but wireless B was in 99. It doesn't say this here, but that was 2.4 gigahertz. And then when we hit wireless A, that was in 99 as well, and that was 5 gigahertz. G was a combination of the two, and that was in 2003. We had 11 megabits per second. We went up to 54 with G. And now wireless N, that was in 2009, and that was 2.4 and 5. It could have up to 111, I think, megabits per second. Now here's the fun fact. If anyone ever tells you that I'm connected to a 2.4 gigahertz network and I'm using AC, they're wrong.
Really?
The AC standard does not exist for 2.4. If you connect to a router that says it's 802.11 AC and you are on 2.4, you are using N.
Okay.
That's kind of like your spark plugs in a diesel engine, right?
Yeah. So, and a lot of times you'll see it where it'll say it's Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 4. Most routers nowadays are going to be AC and N. Those are going to be the two standards you see. And if you all through this progression, they were all focused on speed, like just raw speed getting out, because they wanted wireless to replace a hardwire cable. That was their plan. With AC, and there's different waves of AC, they got pretty close. Some of the AC, you can get up to a gigabit per second. Perfect conditions. There's a lot of things there that come into place, but it's very, very fast. But you got to be really close to it. And so when they started to work on AX or Wi-Fi 6, in 2018, they wanted to go back and do something with 2.4 because a lot of IoT devices use 2.4. It goes further in your home or wherever it is so they can communicate a lot easier. And so what they came up with is they said, we're going to go back and focus on efficiency. And so they took 2.4 and they took those channels of 1, 6, and 11, and they further subdivided those and giving very little small lanes to these devices. And so in 2.4, it makes it more efficient. It's not a lot of data, but IoT devices don't need a lot of data. They just need a little bit of communication that's consistent. And so Wi-Fi 6 is going to kind of change the game in that area for 2.4 and IoT, which is really exciting because it's really needed. So that's kind of what the 802.11 means. The new naming scheme, don't be confused. That's all it is. It's just a standard.
All right. So, wow, that's so they change up a whole bunch, and I guess it's a definite learning process as they go as well, because they're learning after they do something that, oh, wait, we got a better way of doing it. Do they kind of, you said they before they officially release them, they kind of hint at it or they start using it. Is there, beside the AX, is there another upcoming trend that they're talking about?
That's the biggest one. I mean,
Okay.
it is actually set in stone a little more now. But usually N was one of those ones that felt like it took forever. You would see wireless routers with draft in on them. And that was just the draft version of the standard. It felt N took forever for some reason to come out and really, I mean, it was 6 years between G and N.
Yeah.
And it was 6 years between, N and AC, but still you kind of see where that is.
Okay. And then do the different difference between them, do they allow certain amount of devices? I get this question a lot, like how many devices can we connect on the Wi-Fi at the same time?
So one thing about Wi-Fi that I don't even think I've mentioned yet is that when you have Wi-Fi devices, if they are on the same channel, so if they're on channel 1, let's say, only one device can talk at once. So if you have 5 devices, they are fighting for that airtime. They are fighting for that time to talk. And so whether you may have a very fast connection, but if that airtime is being divided up, it's going to slow it down per se, because it's like being in a room with 100 people. You got to wait your turn to talk. Okay. Whereas if you have 2 or 3 people, you're going to be able to talk a little bit quicker than the other ones. And so you get into high density environments. And that's where 5 gigahertz really shines, is because you can have what they call MIMO, which is multi-in, multi-out, which means that it has multiple radios so that it can handle multiple devices at once, or it can do in and out at the same time. And then when you hit AC wave 2, which was 5 gigahertz again, you have multi-user, which means that multiple devices are able to talk at once. It helps that efficiency and allows that airtime to use decrease, which means that it seems faster to everyone. But yeah, once 2.4, it's going to be hard to get a lot of devices just because that bandwidth is so small. Whereas 5 gigahertz is going to be open that up wider.
Wow. And so when you're talking about the gap in between these talking, to one person or one device being able to talk in, are we talking multiple seconds? Are we talking
you're talking milliseconds, but
milliseconds? Okay.
When you're milliseconds add up when you're talking about data packets, because data packets are not just one. You don't open one website and you get one packet. You're getting many packets just to open that one website. So there's a lot of talk between a lot of those devices.
Okay.
And it happens pretty quick.
So, and yeah, it's just, this is always going on. That's what's so amazing. And just when you had that picture of all the different waves types that are happening, geez, we're getting hit all the time with a bunch of different wavelengths and styles. So I'm glad that the wireless one is not too bad for us that they know of yet.
It's
I don't know.
non-ionizing, so it shouldn't.
Yes.
And the way they measure that is they look for the ambient temperature increase on human skin, and that's how they measure whether it can be harmful. And those are the same tests they do with 5G and things of,
Okay.
of that kind. So that's how they measure that, if it's safe or not.
Thank you, all those college kids, for joining up to be part of that study. We appreciate it. Oh, that's hot. Don't know. Awesome. Well, I mean, we're kind of coming to a close here. It's been super eye-opening. We did want to open it up. I don't know, David, if you had any questions come in.
We had one question from Macy, but I'm not sure because there's a delay here, and when it shows up on Facebook, she mentioned some other things, but then she said, "What's that?" And I guess she was referencing something that we were talking about at the moment. But when the question came through, I am not sure. So Macy, if you're still listening and want to get a quick question in here, shoot us again here on Facebook, and we'll get an answer.
It's one of those topics that's hard to cover without talking about physics. It's not magic, it's physics.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Well, I think Macy was just trying to, make it nice and easy for Brad. What is that? Just tell us, what is that? And in very good detail. We'll give you about another 45 minutes. Just tell us what that is. No, anything back from her?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, but if she writes in before we finish up, we'll definitely tackle that. Thank you so much, Brad, for coming on. Brad has been a superstar with participating, with being on these Chill with Gyms. We've really enjoyed getting to know him and just having the discussion. When he comes on, he always brings some value. So is there anything else that you'd like to just share, wireless or not wireless related, for the 5 million audience members we have right now?
I think the biggest thing is don't get stuck up on that you have to understand everything we talked about today. It's most of the manufacturers are trying to make this simple for you. If you don't know, if you have a larger setup, talk to someone that knows how to install this stuff. Because you can spend countless amount of money and not get what you need. And it could be a very simple answer.
Yeah, I think to me the biggest thing that you talked about today was the things that may affect your wireless network. Jim, you mentioned the microwave. Brad, you talked about the plaster walls or things with water. Those I think can probably help a lot of people if you're experiencing difficulty connecting to your wireless in a specific area. Look at that route between where you are and the wireless router and what's in between there. Something is probably blocking it or interfering with it. And if you're getting interference from a microwave, you may also want to look at your microwave.
True.
Yeah. Well, I noticed today that the microwave also interferes with my Bluetooth signal as well.
Yeah,
So.
that's another wireless technology. We didn't even get into that one, but same concept, right, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, radio frequencies are radio frequencies. So
yeah. Usually, when the microwave is interfering, that means there's a cage around the microwave, the Faraday cage, and it blocks the microwaves from escaping. And usually, if you're catching interference, it might mean there's a little break there in the cage, and you have some stray microwaves getting out.
Well, that explains the third arm I've been growing out of my back.
And I think that's a very valid point. Really quick, is that people get, when we talk about it's in the same frequency, you're like, oh, well, it's the same thing. Yes, it's the same frequency, but the wattage output, so how much power is being output, is nothing compared to what a wireless access point does. The wattage is much higher on a microwave because that's what it's meant to do. And so it's very low on access points. That's the biggest difference. Maybe the same signal, but how powerful that signal is a difference.
So Brad, does that mean that there are hackers out there that have already gotten into everyone's wireless networks and with the flip of a switch is going to turn it into a huge microwave? Just
No, because most of them are built so they can't even do that. So
okay.
it would physically melt before it did anything. So
Right. Well, I got worried there for a second. There's been a lot of hacks out here lately, and it's making me nervous. So
Yeah. Well, when I saw the picture where the microwave was right there next to the Wi-Fi, I was like, I mean, I'm glad you said that at the end because I was like, wait, uh-oh. So it's like the difference in the shock between, you know, a 9-volt battery, not a lot of wattage,
well,
and
you know, 5G is higher on the spectrum than microwaves and so that's where it's the micromillimeter. I can't say it today. Wave technology, and that's where people are so, you know, caught up on it, is that it is higher than a microwave. The issue is that it's still not ionizing and the wattage is still low. It's still safe.
okay.
how much did
Awesome.
they pay you to say that, Brad?
AT&T, you know, throw some money, chill with Jim Way, please. You know, we got to pay for these amazing backdrops here and to give George Lucas his rights. Awesome, Brad. Thank you again. And we do very, very much appreciate it. And David, while we got some time, what's on the schedule for next week?
Yeah, well, next week, Brad, you ought to just come back next week and be our guest again. We're going to be talking about the CMMC. So a lot of people are talking about the CMMC right now because it is, well, it's going into effect. And if you want to continue to get contracts from DoD and probably in the future federal gov and maybe state gov down the road, you're going to need to know about the CMMC. So we're going to talk about it, cybersecurity certification that is big news now.
Awesome. Awesome. So join us next week. It's going to be very good information, but also for those out there, this standard has been talked about being in place for a little over a year, but they're starting to crack down now where it's required. So come and learn about it. If you have any DoD federal contracts, it's definitely going to be very important to your business coming into the future. And you can join us at the same chill time at the same chill network. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Brad, very interesting. Thank you for all the knowledge you have shared.
You're welcome.